Avarie and Ravi here to break down last weekend's loss against Wisconsin and preview the quick turnaround to Iowa here on Friday. We can talk about the crushing 24-17 overtime loss, but I kind of want to get to the start of that game and Chubba Purdy's first start for Nebraska. Just what did you make of his start and kind of what he brought to this team that first quarter?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the thing that he seemed to bring was just a level of confidence that the other quarterbacks, whether they ever had it, have since lost it long ago. He doesn't have the burden and the baggage of everything that's happened this season because this is really the first time he's been involved outside of that last drive against Maryland. And so I thought his confidence, and honestly, he seems like he's got the best feel for the position of any of the three quarterbacks. It looks a little bit more natural with him out there. You know, with Harburg, we always knew it was going to be a little bit of a growing pain with his lack of experience, but it's not at this point. Harburg's actually played more college football than Chubba Purdy has in terms of snaps and games as a quarterback. So I think there is kind of a natural feel for the position that Chubba has. And listen, he didn't look great last year. He didn't look great in the spring game. The development that he's gone through under this coaching staff, I think, has to go to their credit. But it just looked less scary. As somebody watching that game, it just felt like a more cohesive product on the field. And now obviously they bogged down a little bit later in the game. But if you think about it, he had the two scoring drives to start the game. Their next drive they got into about the 30-yard line against Wisconsin before they went for it on fourth and one, didn't get it. So they had I think it was 12-play, 55-yard drive to that point. Then they have the drive before the half that ends in the missed field goal. That's another quality drive, and then he has the drive at the end of the game to get them into field goal position to tie the game. So 5 of, I believe, the 11 drives that they had as a team were scoring worthy, whether they got points out of them or not. That, to me, is a huge improvement from where they've been as a team on offense.
Yeah, kind of just giving a stat line. He was 15 for 23 passing, 169 yards passing, 14 carries for 105 yards. I tweeted this during the game, but after the 2 drives, Nebraska had 151 yards of offense, 14 points in the first quarter. They had 13 the entire season in the first quarter. So just an interesting start. So I want to ask you this. Did it feel like Nebraska changed the game plan and that's what slowed things down, or did it just feel like Wisconsin and Tanner Mordecai found a rhythm and then it kind of shifted towards Wisconsin? I felt like there was a drive in the second quarter. They strung together like a nine-play scoring drive, and it felt like from that point on, Wisconsin they weren't in full control, but you could tell they had a little bit more momentum than they did in the first quarter. Was it more of a lack on Nebraska's side, or do you think Wisconsin just finally found their footing?
Yeah, so I think Wisconsin definitely settled in on offense a little bit. You saw early that, Tanner Mordecai really struggled with some of his passes. I mean, that broken hand was really apparent early. I don't know if the painkillers just kicked in later in the game because he looked like a totally different guy after the first couple drives. It was super weird. So I don't know if they just mistimed the shot or whatever he needed to get that thing going. But maybe his hand was still numb when he went out there to start the game. But he settled in. The offense settled in for Wisconsin. But honestly, the thing that I found the most frustrating after the first 2 drives, and I gave Satterfield his credit for developing Chubba Purdy, I am also going to criticize a little bit on the kind of the sequential play calling that he had some issues with after those first couple drives. It seemed like he kept, and this has been an issue all season, it seems like he keeps going away from stuff before it stops working. And I get that he's trying to stay ahead of the defense. He's trying to stay ahead of the curve. But let's make sure the defense is ever going to stop what you're doing before you change it up. It seemed like they were settling in with Emmett Johnson. It seemed like there were some pep plays with Billy Kemp and Thomas Fidone and Malachi Coleman in the passing game that kind of looked like they were working. And it didn't really seem like he was willing to stick with the stuff that was working. That would be my biggest criticism of what Nebraska did after the first 2 drives, because I thought there was still hay to be made in those areas and with those types of plays before he went away from them. And so, yes, while Wisconsin did get better, they did settle in. I thought there were way more points on the board for Nebraska than they ended up getting. I mean, relatively to what we've seen, right? This team isn't going to put up 45 on Wisconsin. I thought they could get to 24-28 pretty easily, and obviously that didn't end up being the case. So I do think it is a little bit of both, but I'd regret not bringing up the fact that I don't think the play calling did Nebraska's offense any favors.
Right, and then now it's a quick turnaround. We're going to set our sights on a 9-2 Iowa team, which another team with a really interesting storyline this year. You look at a 9-2 team and you're not thinking they've had a ton of struggles maybe, but then when you look at the records and you look at the scoring, which has been probably the narrative for this team this year, they average 18 points a game, and 9 of their wins, 5 of them have been one scores. Coach Rull yesterday said something interesting, and he said one of their strengths is that they actually will play in a 10-3, 10-7, 7-3 game, and they're comfortable.
Yeah.
Their heart rate doesn't change. And it's really interesting to ask you this question, but how much of a strength is that to Iowa that maybe this is something that they've done kind of year after year a little bit that's led to the season like this season where the scoring is so low, but they will always find a way. Is that one of their biggest strengths, is that they can close out a game with just the lack of scoring that they know was going to happen on their offense?
Yeah, I mean, if you kind of look at it from the Nebraska perspective, if Nebraska had that as part of their skill set, they're probably sitting at 7 or 8 wins themselves this year. So I absolutely do think it's a strength. And a lot of times when we're talking about stylistic issues, we talk about, they really want to pick up the pace, and they really, like Wisconsin against Nebraska, I thought their pace bothered the defense a little bit and fatigued them, didn't allow them to get the rotations in the way they want to.
Not to mention they inserted Braylon Allen just randomly into that game as well. We kind of forgot to mention
Which
that.
nobody really thought was going to happen, and then he gets a bunch of carries. And like, oh, yeah, Braylon Allen's still pretty good at football.
Anyway, Iowa, but forgot about that.
But you don't always talk about it with the other side of things where it's not every team is comfortable just playing in the mud. Coach Rule's talked about that all year. He's like, I want it to snow, and I want the weather to be bad, and I want this to be ugly. I know that's what he wants. Iowa's definitely more comfortable as a team doing that than Nebraska is right now.
I think you're right.
I do think, though, that's a style of game that Nebraska can win.
Right.
I think you're more likely to win that type of game if you're Nebraska than you are a shootout for sure. So being in this type of game, even though Nebraska is, especially record-wise, inferior to Iowa, I think this is a game that's more winnable to them than even like a Maryland or Wisconsin. I thought were worse matchups for Nebraska, even though Iowa's a better team, if that makes sense. So stylistically, I do think that's a strength of Iowa, but I also think it helps Nebraska stay in this game. Yeah.
Ball security, huge thing for this team all year long, obviously. It felt like maybe it was because Chubba was in at quarterback last week that area was taken care of a little bit until that last drive. I don't know if you really count that.
I don't.
Right. And it seems like that's kind of where everyone's at in consensus there. But a huge thing for this Iowa team is their defense. They have 40 points off turnovers. 40 points off turnovers. So you want to know where the supplement scoring is coming for the offense. You have it right there. Third scoring defense in the nation. So if there's ever been a weekend in Nebraska's schedule where you can piece it all together, this would hopefully be the weekend where you cannot give the ball to this Iowa team.
Yeah, and it's kind of a weird concept there because one, this Iowa offense is so inept that you can give them more possessions and they may or may not hurt you.
Right. Very true.
But the defense is so good that if you give them opportunities for turnovers, they might just score on them themselves. Right? So you obviously you don't want to turn the ball over ever. But if you can keep the defense from taking those turnovers and turning them directly into points, I think this is actually a game where you can kind of get away, not that you want to, but you could kind of get away with some turnovers if they're not in really vulnerable places on the field. Because, again, the Iowa offense probably not going to take advantage if the Iowa defense. Right. You got pick sixes, you got special team touchdowns, you got like scoop and scores. Those are the things I'm concerned about. If Nebraska turns it over, but they literally don't directly lead to points from the defense or special teams, I'm not as concerned about that area. Obviously, you would love to see Nebraska not turn it over for their own sake so that they have more opportunities to try and exploit Iowa's defense, maybe try and take advantage of a secondary that's missing Cooper DeJean on the back end and maybe find some big plays there like we saw with Jalen Lloyd last week. But if they don't actually allow the defense to score from Iowa, I don't know how much the turnovers hurt you.
Yeah, I think we could talk about this Iowa team all day long, but I think for this Nebraska team this week, the sole focus is on this Nebraska team. And as Ruhl said yesterday, potentially 24 seniors will be a part of the senior day activities. Obviously, there's some questions there. We're not sure who will be back and who won't be with COVID stuff like that. But I do want to focus on that senior group just a little bit and how much they've been through in their 4 years here, or if it's their 5 years here, whatever it may be. And we hear from this staff and Coach Rull a lot, just how much they admire this group for buying in and just truly embracing the process that this staff has brought to them. And I think we've seen it in return for some of these seniors. I want to ask you just who in this class has emerged to you, maybe over the last few years, but especially this season, and has put a well-pieced, impressive season together so far.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be totally honest. I get super confused about who's a senior and who's not.
Fair.
Because of the – so I think if this person – I believe this person, Ty Robinson, is a senior that I think has the opportunity to come back for his 5th year if he wants to. I think. We can
do some fact checking, but I know it's confusing.
Chubba Purdy's in his 4th year and he's a sophomore, so it's very confusing.
Yeah.
But I believe Ty Robinson is one of those guys that is at least academically a senior.
Yep.
I don't know about eligibility-wise. I know he has 1 year left if he wants it. But that to me is a guy, he's kind of an epitome of what we've seen from this coaching staff, a guy that we've kind of been waiting for a couple years to make an impact. You're like, I think he's talented, but he hasn't really done a whole lot up to this point. And then this year, between him and Nash, it's been one of the strong points of that team is kind of that D tackle, nose tackle spot, whatever you want to call it, in the 3-3-5. And Ty Robinson to me is kind of just that epitome of guys that were bought in, that weren't brought in by Coach Rull. They probably had some attachments to their previous coaches and were able, because they bought in, to take their game to an entirely different level. And it's not just the football coaching staff, right? You've got Corey Coleman with the strength and conditioning staff, where he has changed the bodies of a lot of these guys, made them, like, Ty Robinson has never moved this well in his life, right? Yeah. And that is on the strength and conditioning staff. Yeah. And then the coaching staff puts him in a position to be successful. So to me, I look at, because he's on the defense that's been so successful this year, I look at a guy like Ty Robinson and say, that to me is what I think one of the things that Coach Rull is going to be the most proud of from this team, because he talked about it at the start of the year. There's been a bunch of guys that when he was at Baylor, when he was at Temple, that they just either left the team or they didn't play because they weren't bought in. And that's part of the reason the first couple years at those places went the way they did, is because he was starting from scratch. He was starting over. I get that Nebraska fans, whether it's 5 wins, whether it's 6 wins, are not going to be as happy because of what we felt like the year could have been.
Yeah.
But the fact that it is 5 wins and not 2 or 3 or 4 at least is because of the fact of these older guys that bought in, and you didn't have to scrap and start from scratch with these. I mean, on offense they kind of did, but that was an injury thing, not a buy-in thing. But the ability for this coaching staff to get guys to be bought in and to bring out the best of those guys once they were bought in, I think is going to pay huge dividends down the line.
So to clarify, he's a junior.
Okay.
But in 2019, 2019 was a redshirt freshman, and then 2020 was COVID season, and then 2021 he was a redshirt freshman because of COVID, and then 2022 was a sophomore, and this year he was a junior. So for reasonable
he's
confusion,
been here forever.
Yes,
that's all I know.
For reason. So my last thing is, Coach Rull told us yesterday, even though after it was a heartbreaking loss for this team, and they're pretty upset right now. He said, I had a ton of guys walk into my office and say, I want to come back next year and play, and I had recruits call me saying, I want to go there. What do you think that says about what is happening on the inside of this program, or what is being identified even from young kids outside of the building? Yeah,
I mean, I think it's something else that he said yesterday. He goes, if you cut open this program, you would see a football team, a football program as healthy as they can possibly be, and how he is incredibly happy about where they're at and still not happy with the record, right? I think it just goes to that point. I think this team is in an incredible place culturally, foundationally, and I think people see that. When you do things the right way, you don't really have to advertise it that much. People can just tell because so many other people do it the wrong way, and they look at you and they go, oh, that's different. And they want to be a part of something that's different. And I think that is super appealing to not just the guys on the team, but recruits across the country that are like, oh, look how they treat their guys. Look how they look out for their guys. Look how they say, hey, you should be going to the NFL. Like, we would love to have you back, but it's best for you to move on. Or stumping for his defensive coordinator, who's awesome, to get a head coaching job. Like, that's not beneficial for Matt Rule, right? But it's the right thing to do.
Totally.
And so people notice that. When you do things the right way, people want to be a part of it. And I think that's what you're seeing in guys wanting to come back, recruits wanting to be a part of it. That's not like an age thing to me. I think it's pretty obvious to most people when you're doing things they want to be a part of. And honestly, whether Nebraska beats Iowa on Friday and gets bowl eligible, or whether they end the season on a 4-game losing streak, which would be obviously disappointing, I think Nebraska is so lucky to have Coach Rule, because I don't know how many guys in the industry, and I was somebody who wanted Luke Fickell before the hire was made. I don't know how many guys in the industry could do this job this way, in a way that it feels like, oh, we might be good for a while after this. It's not just, I'm probably going to get hate for this from Deion because he hears everything, right? But this isn't Colorado can't expect Deion to, even if it goes awesome, he's not going to be there for 10 years, right? If Matt Rule's not here for 10 years, I'll be pretty surprised at this point. And so I just think Nebraska's really lucky to be in the position they're in with the guy they hired last year.
Yeah, going into this game on Friday, there's a lot on the line for this team. And so, if I was a senior and in their shoes right now, I'd need some therapy probably, knowing that my career might be on the line. And, the year that they did have where it felt like things are going in the right direction, I think there are a lot of guys that want to and hope to still be a part of this program and where it's going. So we have a huge thanks and appreciation, I know, from the outside for those guys in that class that have stuck around and bought in and been a part of this Coach Rule staff process, because there's a lot on the line on Friday. And as much as it is a physical battle, it's just another one of those mental battles for this team and who can tough it out. So we may be here next week. We may be here in 2 weeks.
Fingers.
We'll find out. But we thank you for joining us for this recap, and we may see you again next week.
A Hurrdat Sports Network production.